right, we're back with another episode of Conf T with your SC. I am your host, Bryan Young. I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Tom Porto. How are you, sir?
I'm very well, Bryan. How we doing?
Doing pretty good. Doing pretty good. If you are watching us on YouTube, you will notice a familiar face, although he might look a bit more masculine and I don't know, just mountainy than before. But this is the third time we've had our special guest here, Mr. Ryan Harami, on the show. Ryan, welcome back.
Thanks for having me back. I feel honored.
Fresh from chopping wood outside.
With no shirt on, and it was like negative 20 degrees. I don't know how he does it.
These 4K cameras catching all the beads of sweat.
Yeah, you got some sawdust in your beard. You might want to get rid of it. That's what makes it more manly. So we've got Ryan on, so that must mean we're talking about Meraki, because Ryan is the man. In fact, we spent the first 30 minutes of before the show talking with him about just various Meraki stuff and like, hey, what's going on here? Are we doing this there? And yeah, he's just a man when it comes to Meraki. So no one better to have on to talk about the Meraki line than Ryan. So of course, that's why he's here. And that's what we're going to be chatting about today. Since it's been so long since we've had a Meraki update, even though from a episode count you've been on pretty recently, but of course it's been a while since we've done these episodes. There's definitely been a lot of development and progress in just features and stuff on the hardware. Not necessarily a lot in terms of new products. There are a few, we'll touch on those, but a lot into the software and the, dare I say, AI portion of it, that I just found interesting. And with me kind of being out of the generalist role now, it's not something I'm as privy to as much anymore. So Tom was actually, the one that kind of was like, hey, they're doing this now. We should talk about that. I'm like, oh, I didn't even know that. So I guess let's just get started with the Meraki Vision stuff. No, it's funny because just after I started at Cisco was when they launched the first cameras, and it was revolutionary in the idea that, hey, instead of having to require a network video recorder device with a bunch of hard drives that all the cameras just feed into, right? Let's just record it on the camera itself. Let's put storage there, and let's alleviate the network from being just bombarded with all that video traffic from all those cameras. And it really opened a lot of doors for a lot of customers. And it sounds like we've come a long way from that and a lot of the cool stuff we're doing. So I'll let you go with it, Ryan. Like, what are we doing now with Meraki Vision? What's the latest and greatest there?
Yeah, I mean, there's just been some of the updates I think are a little understated when you think about what they look like in the dashboard. You're kind of like, okay, we put all this engineering effort, and it's like this one line on the dashboard that says like upload this file, and you're like, okay, like cool, what does that do? But then like when you start to really unpack what we've been working on, there's just some really cool stuff. So um, we've kind of had this vision for the cameras for a long time, pun intended, where we knew there's like table stakes, right? Which is like, okay, like the first thing that a camera is going to obviously be thought of as a use case is for physical security, right? So we're like, all right, we got to like build this feature set, build that feature set, do motion searching, build a new vision portal. We actually, if you go to vision.meraki.com now that's how you log in and view all your cameras. So we knew we kind of had some technical debt on that front, and we've come a long way, even through like mobile app, right? Where you can now view all the feeds in the mobile app. It's a native experience. So we've been kind of working through all that stuff, but kind of in parallel to that, there's been a broader strategy at Meraki of saying, hey, listen, we have a lot of data, right? We have a lot of data that we gather from our networking devices, and we've started to run machine learning algorithms on that data to do really cool things with our other products, like anomaly detection. Like we can tell you, hey, if normally on a Tuesday, this many wireless clients fail to authenticate, but today there's 10x that. That's an anomaly, right? Like that's machine learning running on that, and we can do anomaly detection. So we've kind of had amongst all of our products this idea of machine learning going on. With the cameras, though, specifically, we've always had this idea that we talked about that we build the cameras to act as a sensor on the network, right? So we want to make the cameras so good that you never actually have to watch the footage, right? Like that's the idea behind it, right? Like we don't want you watching hours of footage to find an incident. We want you to quickly be able to hone in on whatever it is that you wanted it to guess, or maybe you never even want to watch the footage. Like our head of our camera product, George Bentic, always gave this really fun example where one of our first deployments of the cameras was like this guy who just wanted to watch sheep in a meadow, right? And he never wanted to watch the footage. He just wanted to know, like, can you give me a heat map of where the sheep are on what day? Right. So all he wanted was the heat map. Never wanted to go watch the feed, but just was like, can you give me the heat map? And then you're like all of a sudden going, wait, there's like a lot of people that probably want to use cameras just as a sensor. They don't care to ever see the footage, right?
Well, think of how much
So
footage is recorded on security cameras. Like out of the millions and possibly more hours of footage recorded every day, or even shorter period than that, right? How much of it is actually watched?
yeah,
No one has a time span to do that.
yep. Yeah, it reminds me of that like Rick and Morty joke where it's like, "What is my purpose?" It's like you make you flip the bread, and it's like so these hard drives are out there being, "What is my purpose?" Like you store the thing that no one's gonna watch, Um, but but yeah, so we had some very like practical early examples of using the cameras as a sensor, right? And we started to do things like people detection, right, and car detection, and those were us taking video analytics and teaching the camera, here's these objects that we want to spot, and we refined our object modeling, right? Like we had a V1 version of the person modeling, then we had a V2 version of the people modeling, so that it was getting more and more accurate. um, and the latest thing that we've released is this thing called custom CV, right? So it's called custom computer vision, and it essentially is a in the dashboard you can upload your own model that you want the camera to spot, right?
Hmm.
Um, and this is like as like a sales guy, like when you tell customers about this feature, it's like this really weird phenomenon where I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to tell you to do with this. Like, I can't guide you, right? Like, you
Right.
actually know your business way better than I do. So when I'm talking about this feature, I'm kind of giving all these what ifs and hand waving and, all this kind of stuff. So it's a really weird thing to kind of explain. But essentially, it's like the camera can now sense whatever you want it to sense, whatever you model it to sense, like it can sense that. So, like, I just have other customer examples that I can give them. Like, one engineer, when they demoed this initially, was like, hey, I've trained it to spot my cats, right? And you're like, okay, that's kind of cool. Like, I can now count number of cats in a thing. And he's like, but there's more. It can actually tell if it's this cat versus that cat. And you're like, okay, we've gone a little too far. Like, the technology was not built for this. um, but then you start to go, oh man, okay, so like if a business wants to count the number of boxes getting loaded onto a truck, right? If you are a manufacturing facility and you want to count the number of, pills being loaded into a bottle, or you can start to go, oh man, like a sensor can automate a ton of that, right? If you want to alert someone when there's not two people in front of a piece of machinery, right? The model being like the model that we want to detect is not just a person. We want two distinct people, and they should be in this frame. Otherwise, like this machinery should not be run, right? And so you start to go like, your mind just starts to expand in terms of like, man, there's a lot of use cases around this, right? Um, so yeah, that's the premise of it. Is like, yeah, we don't know how you're going to use it, but we think it's pretty dang cool, and more people need to know about it.
That's awesome. I do remember having a customer years ago, a manufacturing customer, and they really, I think the Gen 2 cameras had just been launched, and they were, because we were doing people detection, the first version of people detection. And that exact scenario came up where it's like, well, could I train it to detect the number of, widgets or whatever they were manufacturing at the time as it's going, across the conveyor belt, right? And at the time, of course, the answer unfortunately was no. But it sounds like that's no longer the case.
Yeah, spot on. And you brought up the Gen 2 cameras. Um, so yeah, just to quickly expand on that. So yeah, we had the Gen 2 cameras, which were anything of our camera models that end in two, right? So the MV12, the 22, 72, 52, etc. Right? So we recently launched our Gen 3 cameras, which are the MV63 and the MV93. Basically, one of the bigger reasons for revving the camera models, of course, we wanted to step up the optical sensors and all that kind of stuff, right? So now these are 4K and 8K video recording, right? The other thing was to beef up the processor, right? Because if you have that edge compute, right, that is essentially doing this video analytics, right? Like we wanted to enable that to have more and more use cases with this custom CV. So there's been a huge bump there in those specs. They're all the Qualcomm Snapdragon processors, right? So these are the same processors in like Android phones, right? So if it's running a whole operating system on your phone and doing all the crazy things that obviously a phone has to do, they're pretty powerful. So and then combine that with like the solid state drives that we build into them, right? So it's like laptop grade solid state drives. We're not talking like limited read write drives or something like that. There's long term solid state drives. So the hardware is now obviously, like, we don't want to get into like bits and bytes of the hardware, but like the hardware is now revved up to be able to kind of tackle not only the physical security use cases, but also these custom computer vision use cases.
Now, how would one go about getting that what did you call them, custom vision model? How would you go ahead and do that? Let's say I'm a I keep thinking back to the what was that show? The Silicon Valley, right? With the hot dogs, right? And the machine learning on the images. Let's
Yeah,
say let's say I'm a
exactly.
hot dog manufacturer, right?
Yeah,
And I want to count the number on the conveyor belt.
yeah.
Am I just Googling a bunch of images and uploading them? I can't imagine that's the case. How do I go through that process if I wanted to implement this
Yeah,
as a
so
customer?
this is opening up a whole new world of ecosystem partners, right? So like, not to like, go back to, it feels like when the iPhone launched is like the new since the dawn of time, right? Like, but like when the iPhone launched, right? Well, like the crazier thing about the iPhone launch was like the ecosystem that it built. All of a sudden you had all these developers that had this new
Yep.
platform to go build on, right? So kind of building off of that, now that we have this custom CV thing, we have a whole set of ecosystem partners that we've onboarded, uh, who can do this as a service for you, right? So they will work with you to spec out exactly what you are trying to count, right, with the cameras, or what you're trying to sense with the cameras. And we have a large list of them on our apps.meraki.io page. So that's our apps marketplace. So it's basically pre-vetted partners that we've already worked with. We've onboarded them. We have like specific requirements for them to get onto there as well. Like the biggest go-to-market motion for Meraki is a see, try, buy motion, right? So we very much believe in sending out trials and letting you test it and go through all the use cases. So we demand that same thing of our ecosystem partners, right? So they have to have a see, try, buy methodology. So they all have like a free trial for you to test out their services. So yeah, there's a few of them that are loaded up there today. A couple of them I'll call out. There's a company, Cogniac, Cogniac.ai is their website. Really, really cool stuff. They kind of specialize in physical safety, manufacturing, that kind of stuff. There's another one called Meld CX. Again, the service they are providing you is that they are going to generate the file for you that you upload into the camera to do the sensing, right? So in our hot dog example, they would be the ones, gathering the like 3,000 photos of hot dogs, training the model to that, hey, this is what we want to count. And then you get the output of that, which is a file that you upload into the camera. Yeah, that's exactly how you would go about it. I do know, like, based on the cat example I gave you earlier, right? There's software out there where you can go build your own models. I don't know what that software costs, or the time and effort that goes into it and that kind of stuff. So it's definitely possible to build it yourself. But I would say that from an enterprise perspective, we would say, hey, listen, talk to our ecosystem partners, and they'll get you going.
Gotcha. And you guys would know kind of which of those partners would be better suited for one type of classification or whatnot versus another type, right? Depending on the use case.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the folks from those companies would probably tell me that I'm full of it. But yeah, I think right now there's not a ton of differentiation, right? I think they're both offering up services. There probably are some nuances in terms of how they build the models and whatnot, right?
Right, right.
But yeah, it's kind of like basically, if you've heard of all the chat GPT stuff, like anything AI based right now is like a gold rush, right? So it's the wild west. Everyone's literally racing to the hills to try to stake out a plot of land, right? And right now there's not a ton of differentiation, at least from my completely uneducated mind in that. Like, so they're all offering kind of similar services. I think they just like as I was explaining earlier, where we can't possibly know all the use cases that a customer might want, right? And so these companies, what they're doing is they're getting pressed, or they're getting presented with a customer scenario, and then they do it, and then they go, "Wow, we did it!" Right? You're like, maybe we didn't know that could be done, right? And so now they start to go, okay, what other customers, and this is a use case that we can solve, and that's what they tout, right? But it doesn't mean that their methodology was necessarily that different. They're just building a model, right, for you. But like, one of them was like a crazy example I heard, which was like, I forget which state it was, but they wanted to monitor if trucks were idling at their way facilities, right? And because they're by law they're not supposed to be idling, right? And the cameras can detect the exhaust coming out the tailpipe, right? So there's like crazy stuff like that where like you can do an object model around like air, like like what do you mean? Like what is that? But yeah, there's some really cool stuff that they're doing with it.
That's awesome.
So
That's
I
really
think
cool.
one of the interesting things to me, right, and because I mean I've seen other camera vendors have something similar to like what we were doing, right? Like we built the people detection thing, car detection, right? But I think what really differentiates us from a lot of what's already out there is the idea that you can take anything now and model it and run it on the camera, which I mean, I think pretty sure anyone else you got to go to, you're probably set with a list of things. Here's the things we can and can't do. Oh, and you need a server to crunch all these numbers, right? So,
And the
I
server
mean,
needs 4 GPUs.
right, right. So, I mean, the idea that we're running all that on the camera hardware is that's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Still
and
holding
and
true to
there's
that initial design.
yeah, exactly. And there's going to be some practical limitations of this, right? Like for example, like if you're like, I want to be able to spot hot dogs and cats and tractors and giraffes, right? Like there's only so many models that the onboard processor can then do at the same time, right? So
That'll
there's
be
still
Gen 4.
some yeah, so there's some things like that, like yeah, if you like, I have this one camera, I want it to spot 1,000 different things, like sure, there's going to be some practical examples of that, but like a lot of times, like if you're using cameras as sensors because you have this specific business case for whatever it is that you want to monitor, right? So we still think it makes sense to have this processing at the edge, and exactly what you said, Tom, like it's just very powerful that the infrastructure that you need to do this is like literally plug this camera into the network. You don't even have to have a network connection to it. Just get it power and join over Wi-Fi, right?
Right.
Right.
And
Right.
you've now unlocked this sort of capability. So yeah, it's extremely powerful.
I'm just picturing this scenario where hot dogs, cats, and giraffes, and the other thing you said would all just be kind of flying around, and the camera's like, "Oh my god,
Yeah.
what's going on?"
It's a zoo
I'd
use
probably
case.
have the same
Yeah.
reaction if all those
Yeah.
things were flying around too.
Yeah.
It's like that movie Twister where they see the cow. Oh, it's a cow. Oh, it's another cow. No, I think that was the same one.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
What a great movie. What a great movie. Oh man, no, that's cool. And I to what you were just saying, Tom, I love the fact that it's still in line with the way that the Meraki cameras were originally developed. Right, you guys came in with something that, not for nothing, the CCTV or surveillance or security camera market was pretty flooded with lots of brands, lots of different options in terms of, what is it? Tilt, pan, zoom, PTZ cameras and outdoor cameras and license plate reader cameras, and they were all kind of one or two ways of doing it. At the end of the day, the foundation was still, it's either an analog camera that's going to send the video over a coax, or it's an IP camera that's going to send that feed over a data connection. And Meraki comes in and they're just like, we've got a better idea. We're gonna try this, right, with just the local storage. And then you guys improved on it. The first improvement, retention based storage, or what was it? What was it?
Motion-based
Not retention.
retention.
Motion. Thank you.
Yeah.
I knew it was something with a based and retention in there. You got that. Then you go ahead and add the detection, and then you expand on that. And one other thing, and I know we covered this, I think, on one of the first episodes where we talked about the cameras. When you have a customer that already has an investment in the analog setup, right, where they've already got the DC wires and the coax cables run, and they just want to replace the cameras, they don't want to have to spend thousands of dollars for wiring for data. And you just touched on it, reminded me of it. Those little the hockey pucks there that we have, where you just plug in that 12-volt line, you get a basically a PoE injector there. I think it's 12 to 24 volts on the DC side, and you get a nice PoE injector, and you just join the camera to the Wi-Fi. And
Yep.
that's not a problem, because again, I'm only using data if I'm watching the video live or trying to pull that data off. It's all recorded locally. I
Yep.
think it's great, because the way that it came into market, you couldn't do what you're doing today as effectively as you are if it didn't start with that. I think just my 2 cents.
Spot on. I think having options like that, like, is definitely kind of what helps us be, I hate using this word, but like, quote unquote, more enterprise, right? Like, what's the delineation between enterprise and whatnot? Like, I mean, that's a silly word, but I mean, basically it means that, like, you have more like versatile deployment strategies, right? Like, the fact that it has Wi-Fi built into it is huge, right? Like, that means, hey, in the area, if I want to put this out on a light pole in a parking lot, I got to trench a data cable out to it, right? Like,
Right.
you can just shine Wi-Fi out to it, and like you said, that's how it gets the video feedback. And like, listen, we're not without like some debt in this area too, right? Like, for example, like, people were like, hey, traditionally for our when we buy a camera system, we would buy like the computer that like we use to watch it, right? And just recently, one of the new things we launched was an Apple TV app that you can now use to watch your feeds on a display monitor, right? So now, whether that be in like retail, where they have like the deterrent camera, right, and you want to relay that video back to a TV screen, or just, hey, in your sock, right, you want to have views of all the cameras, right? We said, hey, yeah, like, get a computer and get a web browser and throw it up there, right? Like, that's not enterprise, right? So we're like, okay, like, well, what's the hardware that we can use for this, right? And we start with the Apple TV, and you can like lock the Apple TV. It's super configurable, right? Like, even with our MDM, you can lock the Apple TV into the single app mode, so that literally the only thing it does, it boots up, launches the Meraki window, and boom, it's displaying what you want, right? So there's some cool stuff that we've been working on in there. So yeah, it's definitely been a journey. If any of one listening to this had like the Gen 1 cameras, like, you're a saint, bless you, right? Like, we've went through, like, that was the MVP, right? And we've built and built and built and built. And now I think we have a ton of really cool features that do set us apart from the traditional security market, right? And what's crazy about it is that we know we're like more expensive than other traditional vendors, right? Like, just a normal Axis camera, for example, right? Just throw one vendor out there. I mean, they're cheap, right? Like, they're like $200 cameras, $300 cameras, right? Like, and it's, we're coming in here being like, look at all the cool stuff we've built into this camera. And if you only care about physical security, you're kind of going like, how do I justify the cost? And so now we're starting to bring in other folks into the discussion, right? Just like how years ago it was like you had a VoIP team and you had a networking team, and now all of that's handled by just the networking team. Well, now you used to have a facilities team and a networking team, and now, like, they're knocking on the network teams like, hey, what do you guys think about cameras? Can we plug these into your network, right? And now they're like, well, let me check the security of this. And yet, so we're starting to get traction in that, and that's how we're justifying kind of like, hey, we know our hardware is more expensive, but this hardware unlocks a whole set of new things that we can do, where you're not just having someone recording video and never watching it, right?
Yep. Yep. No, it was the same conversation I had with a customer recently about the cameras. They were interested in it, but from their standpoint, they're like, if I have, you know, a camera that's worth X amount of dollars, keeping an eye on, a line of trucks, and my biggest concern is a $1,200 catalytic converter being stolen or a $2,000 catalytic converter being stolen, I'm not justified in purchasing 2 or 3 cameras to cover that space, because if it happens once, I'm still, it's not worth it. It's not like I'm going to be able to figure out who that person is. It's not like I can read their driver's license.
Yeah.
And again, if you're just looking at it from the original standpoint of security cameras, where it's just physical security, it may be a harder pill to swallow. But you add the additional things we've already talked about, like the motion-based retention. I skipped this one. I think this was the biggest one for me, was just the motion search capability, because I know I've told this story before, but it took me 2 hours to find the portion of the video that was being recorded on a 24/7 camera, to find where the guy had hit the little pylon and broke it. That had happened 2 weeks ago. I had to go through, about 3 weeks worth of video to find that moment that it happened, versus just highlighting the area, hitting search, and then seeing all the events that happened at that time, like what the cameras originally offered. And that was just like, boom, like mind blown right there. And
Yeah.
that was my favorite demo. I was like, and because everyone that was looking at it from a security standpoint, purchaser kind of standpoint, they understood that. They could relate to that, right? They're like, oh yeah, I've been there, trying to find when something happened, and I have absolutely no idea when it did, but I've just got to find this moment in time. And that was one of the first biggest things that I was just like, this is powerful. It's awesome to see how far it's come.
Yeah, and practical examples like that is like, what fuels us sales guys, because a lot of times where I'll be like, hey, but this is going to save you a lot of time in the future, right? And you kind of like make these grand statements, right? And but no, I mean, it absolutely does, right? Like, so yeah, I think that's a great example.
Awesome. Tom, I want you to introduce the next topic of this, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I know you have one, and I hope it's right next to you. You showed it to me the other day. The little oh, there it is. Oh, the nice slow reveal from the bottom.
Right, of course, only for our YouTube viewers who were able to see that, but yes,
Yes,
the
our Patreon subscribers.
right.
Just kidding. We do not have a Patreon. Don't try to look for it.
True. No, it is the MT30, kind of the latest sensor release from Meraki. Ryan, what's that all about, man?
Yeah, so like speaking of like not being able to prescribe to you how you will possibly use this product, right? The
Speaking of
the
starting
MT
from an idea.
yeah, yeah, like I feel like this is like, what if I told you you could do this, right? Like, so like if anyone, has ever dealt with any sort of home automation stuff, right? Like I have I'm like a very amateur home automation person. Like I'm the type of person who like yells "Hey Google" like 7 times before I get it to do something, because I don't
You
enunciate
just
my
made
words.
everyone else's Google just go off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's like the
So I
mortal sin of podcasting. You don't say those
exactly.
words.
So I have like Wemos and that kind of stuff, right?
Yep, yep.
So if you've ever played around that, you've no doubt run into a service like if this then that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you're always taking like, here's this one thing that triggers this other action, right? And a lot of times when you're doing that, you're connecting two services, two like web-based services together, right? Like if I, say this thing, then make an Evernote link or whatever it is. Like there's infinite things you can do with that, right? But the button is, think of it as like the actual physical interaction to kick that off. So if it's like, if I press this button, then go do this, right? And that this thing that you can go do is now a web-based thing, right? So again, like there's the examples of this are something as simple as turn on a Wemo switch and your light turns on. You're like, so I made a button that turns on a light. I think we solved that problem like 100 years ago, right? Um, so that example feels like really silly, yet however, like that's the example that I made it
And
do. So
because it's
going
going over Bluetooth, over the internet, calling an API, talking to this other systems through an API, when you press the button, it may take 5 seconds for that light to come
yeah,
on.
exactly. And
But you know
you're
what's
like,
funny? What's funny
yeah,
about that though is you're really excited when that happens.
yeah,
Anyone else, like if I show my wife that, she's like, "What? What did you just
yeah.
do?" I was like, "Do you
Yeah.
understand what just happened? Like what
I'm like
just
Tom Hanks
traversed
on
the
the beach
world?"
being like, I have made fire, like that's what, yeah,
Yeah,
that's what it feels like.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, that's the silliest example of it. But from from an enterprise perspective, again, like going into this kind of smart spaces, it's a really cool thing. I mean, like for example, we have some customers that are putting it in their office buildings and like, hey, like if this piece of machinery, if the printer needs help or this conference room needs attention, right? Press the button and then that triggers like a ServiceNow workflow that creates a ticket and assigns it to someone and you're off and running, right? That's a use case. Um, we have some like built-in automations for it in the Meraki dashboard. So if you wanted it to do something within Meraki, you can have it toggle on and off a switch port, right? So like if you're powering something off the switch port and you want it to like turn the switch port off, turn the switch port on, it can be a button, that does that. And I actually had one customer reach out for that exact use case, right? There was some piece of machinery that they were pulling power off the switch and they wanted to be able to bounce that, and they didn't want they kept getting tickets. The IT desk kept, hey, can you got to reboot that again, you got to reboot that again, and they're like, here's your button,
So the
like
IT
this is
department
what it
said,
does.
"Here,
Yeah, 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 here you go.
Here's the easy button.
stop. Yeah,
Yeah,
here's
and
your
I'm
easy button. Stop bugging me."
and now like in my mind, my I immediately went to like GoldenEye. Like I'm like, there's gonna be like two synchronous keys that have to turn, and then like you both flip up the glass, and then like you press the button, and then like this, that's exactly how I think about it. But yeah, I mean, there's simple things like that. There's crazier things you can do with it, right? Like one of the engineers was like, hey, like if you guys have ever played around with like the serverless code stuff that the cloud providers are doing, so if you AWS Lambda or Google Run, you can now have code that sits in those serverless platforms, and basically when they run is by receiving a webhook, right? So one of the things the MT30 can do is send a webhook, right? So that you could basically have some code that does something in out there, and this is the button that goes off and runs that code, right? So one of our engineers built a really cool example of this. It was like, hey, if I'm someone who's sitting here deploying like 1,000 dashboard networks or something like that, obviously you can just do that in code. But what if it's like kind of asynchronous, right? Like, oh, I gotta, I'll get a phone call and then I gotta do the thing, right? Cool. Instead of having like launch a terminal, blah blah. Okay, here, hit the button, boom, there goes a dashboard network gets created, right, or something like that. Like I said, these are all very silly examples because I can't, I'm just literally inventing these things as my brain goes on here, but yeah, it's a smart button that basically can trigger anything in the web.
You're gonna have to send me one, Ryan, because I want to try. So I've got some Meraki access points in my house here, and the kids have their own device policies that's attached to their devices, and it would be really cool if I was to be able to press a button and change the device policy for all the devices that are tagged kids to block, and be like a internet timeout button.
Don't make me
Yeah.
take out that button.
No, the easier way to do that is one of the built-in automations is you can enable or disable an SSID, right? So you could just throw all their devices on an SSID, right, and not let them onto your other SSIDs, and then hey, yeah, playtime's over. Click the button. Crying ensues, and it happened a lot faster than if you had to do it manually.
The kids' devices are already supervised MDM on on
Yeah.
Meraki, and they already have the time limits and everything. Like I've said this for years, and my kids are living it. Like they're never gonna get away with a damn thing on my network.
Yeah.
And they're learning. They're learning quickly. Especially my son. he's 10 and a half, so he's at that age where boundaries are starting to get pushed, and we're having to keep an eye on things and explain to him like we see everything. Just so you know.
Yeah,
Oh
create
I wish
that
I still.
distrust of networks early.
yeah, zero trust, buddy. Zero trust. I live it every day.
I wish I still worked on the customer side. I would have just had one of these sitting on my desk, have it programmed to just reboot someone's machine at random.
Yeah,
So I'm thinking all the practical prank uses for these things, which is
yeah,
pretty great too.
yep.
Yes, we've gone from practicality to just prank, and
You got to keep it light.
listen. If you're going to order these buttons, you're going to want at least 3 or 4 of them for just pranks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, April Fool's comes but once a year. You're going to want them. You're going to be in that situation where you're going to be like, oh, if I only had a couple extras. But that is pretty cool. I like that. I like that.
The one I saw the other day, not related to the sensor, but one I would envision doing with the sensor is someone on TikTok like they had a door open close sensor, which we also have, but when someone opens the door, it plays like one of those little riffs from Seinfeld, like
like when Kramer
it's
comes in.
exactly. So yeah, exactly. So now if like someone opens your door, just press a button, audio file plays. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff you can do with it.
That's funny.
I think I told you about this when we were talking prep, but if not, the door sensor, you just reminded me of it. The door sensor came in handy for me a couple weeks ago because I went into my boiler room where my chest freezer is and to just grab something out of the toolbox in there, and I noticed that the chest freezer door was just propped wide open, and I'm like, "Huh, I wonder when that happened."
Yeah.
So I actually have a door sensor on the door for the boiler room. So I said, well, that door is normally closed. When was the last time it was opened? Oh, 3.5 days ago. Awesome.
I didn't take you for
Thankfully,
a cold.
what's
Go
that?
ahead. I didn't take you for a cold plunge guy, Brian, but yeah, if you left it open the last time you did a cold plunge.
Wasn't me. It was my son. It was him, He's all worried about getting back on Roblox, so he's just like vroom, 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 and just left it open. Thankfully, everything was fine, but I'm seriously considering either getting another door sensor or moving that door sensor over to the chest freezer, because that would be a little bit more important. I may want to get a couple text messages and everything if it's open for more than a couple
Yep.
minutes.
So that's funny. That's funny that you said that because this same exact thing happened to me like 4 days ago. So like a week ago, I think I sent one of my kids down to like grab something out of the freezer, and yeah, brought it up. I didn't think anything of it. I went down
Nope.
there 2 days ago. Oh, this door is open like 4 inches. Oh, cool! Like the entire front of the freezer, all defrosted, has been running constantly.
Yep.
Just trying to keep everything cool now for a week, and I'm like, ugh, I literally have a door sensor in a box that I haven't opened yet, sitting on top of that freezer because I was going to do that, and
So close, yet
sure
so
enough,
far.
yeah, it's on there now.
This
But
this this signifies the importance of actually installing the gear that you get, ladies and gentlemen.
don't let it be
Um,
shelfware.
you don't let it be shelfware. That doesn't go just for the Meraki sensors, and use your buttons, use your cameras, use your sensors, use them wisely. With great power comes great responsibility. This has been a public service announcement from your friends at Conf T with your SE.
Yep.
Oh man. Cool. So I'm surprised we spent as long as we did on the buttons, but I love it. Ryan, you're gonna have to send me a few of those because now, yeah, I'm gonna have to play around with those. And let me ask you this, Ryan, for our listeners that would be interested in something like this, do they have trials or promos where they can get them? Are they relatively inexpensive? I mean, I can't imagine they're too much for just being I think they're just a BLE button, correct? You don't
Yeah,
have a
yeah,
battery
they're
or two.
very, very inexpensive. I don't want to say the list price off the top of my head, but let's put it
That's
this
fine.
way: it's I think it's like less. It's definitely less than $500 list price for the button, and I think it's significantly under that. So we're not talking like thousands of dollars. And then, but yes, we can trial them as well. So
Cool.
just talk to your Meraki rep, and they can get you some trials, no problem.
And
Yeah, try it out.
requirement wise, was there a specific version of camera and AP right that they have to work with?
Good
Yes, so
question.
that's a great point to bring up. So it's an IoT device, right? And meaning like it doesn't join over Wi-Fi or anything like that. It actually communicates with the network over Bluetooth. So it does need a Bluetooth gateway, and that Bluetooth gateway can either be a Wi-Fi 5 and above Meraki access point, or a Gen 2 camera and above Meraki camera. So you do kind of need that companion product with it, just that because that will act as the IoT gateway for those devices.
Which
And it,
these have been the devices we've been selling for about 4 or 5 years now, right? Maybe not
Yeah,
5,
yeah. I mean,
probably
Wi-Fi
closer to
5
4.
APs have anything, the last 5+ years. Yeah, yep,
Yeah, because
is there any
you guys were throwing the Bluetooth radios in those things early,
very
with no
early.
purpose
Yep,
at the time, but
yep,
we're
yep,
using that.
exactly.
is there any limit to like how many sensors per AP or per camera you can have?
Yeah, there wasn't an early limitation there. I think it was like 8 sensors per IoT gateway. I think they've like upped that closer to like 50 now or something like that. So like it's
Wow,
like yeah, now you can there is a limitation, but you practically never run into it. Um so yeah.
cool.
Unless you have about 100 buttons and to do 100 different things, then
I just
Yeah.
want a wall of buttons. What does this one do?
Yeah.
and none of them are labeled.
Right.
Yeah.
It can be like the elevator at the Willy Wonka chocolate factory where they've just got buttons everywhere, and who knows where they all go.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Um, on the same track of the Bluetooth Low Energy, I know one of the things we were talking about was customers that are utilizing e-ink displays. Not they don't think these aren't made by Meraki, but these are third party, right? But these e-ink displays that use Bluetooth Low Energy and can connect up to the Meraki access points for price changes, stuff like that.
Yeah, so yeah, building off that Bluetooth radio, right, that we use for the IoT devices, we there's a new kind of retail trend around electronic shelf labels. They're called. So essentially, right, if you ever seen a grocery store is probably like the prime example of this. But yeah, you go around, you have the little tags that all the prices on it. As someone who worked in a grocery store in high school, probably about once a week, you'd go in the back room, you'd print out a list of all the price changes, right? And you get all the tags, and you have to walk around the store and put all those over. So there's a very obvious use case to be able to like push out an update to these things and have them just update, right? Not have to go, and do that all manually. So there's been a whole industry that popped up around this electronic shelf labels. They're really cool devices. They're same type of status though, right? Where they're battery operated. They have like the little small. Some of them are like the CR batteries that are in there that last for like 5 years. They're using those little e-ink displays, and the way they push updates is through the Meraki access points using that Bluetooth radio, which is really slick. So there's whole platforms out there where, again, we're not the ones building that platform, right? We're the ones facilitating it from a hardware perspective, utilizing that BLE radio. But then outside of just like kind of that typical grocery store use case, we've started to see these displays getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And now you have them being used in conference rooms to display, availability. One of the use cases I've been having customers play around with is displaying a QR code that you would scan for Wi-Fi access, right? Now that everyone in the world knows how to use QR codes, that's a really easy way to distribute, a PSK without having to distribute the PSK, right? You now don't have to reveal that. So yeah, there's a lot of cool use cases popping up around that. They're being used for digital media signage, all that kind of stuff. So it's like one of these new things where, again, like the possibilities in this space are really up to you. I actually had another customer that uses it for hot desking, right? So it'll display who's at that desk for the day when they're putting these e-ink displays on every desk and say, hey, this one's available, this one's not. So there's some really cool stuff you can do with it. And the Meraki hardware is on the back end kind of facilitating all that. And these partners that are building out these platforms around this, they're all listed on that apps marketplace that I mentioned earlier, apps.meraki.io. So yeah, there's a whole host of them.
That's awesome. Yeah, just again, it goes back to kind of the foresight that Meraki had when it came to making sure that those access points all had Bluetooth radios, and that when the cameras came out, I don't know if the first gen did, but I know the second gens they had Bluetooth radios in it. It's like, what are we going to need a Bluetooth on a camera for? Well, there you go,
Yep.
and
Yep.
it's come in handy for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
Tom, I don't know if you had any other questions on the Bluetooth stuff. I wanted to go on to the next and last topic here. Let's talk Catalyst for a second. So, anyone that knows enough about Cisco, anyone that knows anything about Cisco, knows that when it comes to switching for the access layer, you kind of have, and you're going the Cisco route, you really have two families to look at, Meraki or Catalyst. And there's always been kind of that sense of, I don't want to say competition, right? Because that's never the thing that we've ever wanted to be in, right? Where we're kind of competing against ourselves. They had different use cases and they had different benefits. But what we've been noticing lately, and I know the intention was given to us, was announced years ago internally, that the intention of the company was to kind of start merging these together and making them a little bit more interchangeable and a little bit just play nicer together versus just, well, this building runs Meraki and this shop over here runs Catalyst, right? We wanted to be able to kind of allow for that mixing to happen a little bit more. And it sounds like, and it seems like, because I've noticed it even on my own dashboard now, that those intentions are coming to fruition. So, Ryan, with all that being said, what can you tell us about the latest developments with the whole Catalyst and Meraki, ecosystems?
Yeah. So this has definitely been in evolution as well, right? Like we you mentioned like we not so much a competition, but it was always kind of like how do you want to manage your gear, right? Like, do you have thousands of switches out there, and you want to, SSH into each one of them? And there's things that like Meraki does really really well, which is like managing a lot of devices at scale. And then there's things like Cisco does really well, the Catalyst switches do really well, which is like have every feature, button, and knob like under the sun that's ever been built by networking, right? Um, there's definitely these use cases, right? That each one is good at, and as we looked across like our customer base, like what we found was, hey, like listen, for like small medium business, right? Like I think Meraki fits 98% of those use cases, right? There's going to be some things that we don't do, and that's where Catalyst comes in, right? As you go up to maybe like Fortune 500 companies, right? Like, and you start to look at our hospital systems, all this kind of stuff. Like more like there was a little bit more complexity in the network. You start to say, well, okay, like Meraki can handle 75% of these use cases, right? And then the other 25%. And as you go up into enterprise and all this kind of stuff, right? Like Meraki starts to like not being able to tackle as many of those. So as you move kind of up market, what we start to see more of is hybrid designs, right? So you start to go, okay, well, like listen, like at my access layer, like where I have 5,000 ports I'm monitoring, like all I need them to do is like layer 2 access, right? Like, and great. But like in the core of that network, I'm going to have a whole host of other requirements that maybe Meraki doesn't have, right? So we got really comfortable with talking around this like hybrid design. Now, the problem behind that from a customer perspective, they're like, okay, so I'm going to like cut this check to Cisco. I'm going to send this money to Cisco, and then Cisco's going to send me Meraki stuff and Cisco stuff. And then I'm going to log in onto this website to configure my Meraki stuff. And then I'm going to like use this but like I paid you, like, why are you not giving me, like, why do I got to do this? Right. Um, so we were kind of like almost like intentionally selling complexity, which is like not what we want to do. Right. Like we're trying to simplify everything. So that's kind of the initial problem statement behind it. So what we've been working on are a couple of things. So the first thing is definitely the one that we're most excited about is what we call catalyst monitoring. So essentially what we mean by this is like if you have these hybrid designs, right? Like you might have a Catalyst 9500 core with a bunch of Meraki access layer switches, right? Cool. Like when you go deploy that gear, yes, you're going to log into the Meraki dashboard, configure your Meraki switches. You're going to SSH into your 9500, configure that, right? But now day 2 on, right? You're out there monitoring your infrastructure. We wanted to build an ability for you to monitor that catalyst switch in the Meraki dashboard, right? So with the catalyst switch, they have the ability to report their telemetry, and we basically built out a way for the Meraki dashboard to accept that telemetry and display it as if it were a Meraki switch, right? So you can, in the Meraki dashboard now, you can say, like, show me what ports are active, which ones are providing PoE, what's their like configuration. You can see all that from a monitoring perspective. If you want the Meraki dashboard to alert you if the switch goes offline or a power supply fails, um, all of those, anything that you could do with Meraki from a monitoring perspective on a Meraki switch, you can now do on the Catalyst switch, right? So we're really excited about it. I think it really drives home that kind of hybrid design. It unlocks a lot of cool new use cases for Meraki. Not so much from a where we're deploying it, but it just makes it so that we're not intentionally inducing this sort of pain, right, into customers' kind of day 2 operations. So um, the best part about it is that it's included with your DNA licensing, right? So when you buy Catalyst Switch, you get DNA licensing to go alongside of it. This functionality is included with that. You do not need a separate Meraki license for this functionality, for this monitoring functionality, which is fantastic. So,
That's
um,
huge. Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah, it's just really, really driving home this kind of hybrid design. The second flavor that is still very much in the works. So I'm not certainly advocating for customers to go run out and do this right now, but the second flavor that is of just the direction we are heading is if you did want to do control of those catalyst switches in the Meraki dashboard, we will be kind of releasing a conversion process. So if you wanted to convert a catalyst switch to a Meraki switch, there will be a conversion process. Today, this is in kind of like I would say a beta process on the 9300. So if you wanted to convert those over, you can. Today, we're still like working out kinks in that process, and we want to make sure it's like really ready for prime time because obviously we know there are millions of Catalyst 9K switches out there. We want to make sure it's ready to go. So in the future, you'll, even if you said, hey, listen, I really want Cisco hardware, but I want it to be managed by Meraki, I want to control it all through Meraki, then great, there'll be a conversion process for those Catalyst 9Ks as well.
Nice. What about on the Wi-Fi stuff? I know I've heard some stuff, and again, because I'm out of that generalist role, I only kind of hear the whispers. What's going on the Wi-Fi front?
Yeah, so at Cisco Live last year, we launched a new converged line of access points. So, like, if you're familiar with like Meraki line of access points, we always call them MR something, right? Meraki
Mm-hmm.
Radio, and so that nomenclature has been in use for all Meraki products since our launch, right? So the new access points are called CW, right? Cisco Wireless, and in true Cisco fashion, they're called the 9162, 9164, and the 9166. It doesn't quite roll off the tongue like the MR56 does, but yeah, these are Wi-Fi 6E access points. But the really cool thing about these is now a converged line of hardware, meaning I can order them in a Meraki mode. So you'd have a dash MR at the end of the name. And when you receive that, it's going to boot up and act just like a Meraki AP, right? So it's going to boot up, look for the cloud, download its config. You don't got to do anything to that device. It knows exactly what to do, right? If you have a controller, a 9800 controller, or you have a DNA Center appliance that you want the device to boot up, you can order them in a traditional Catalyst mode, and they'll boot up and look for the controller. The beauty behind this is that if your needs should change over the life of that access point, you can convert between the two. So from the Meraki dashboard, you can say, nope, I want you to be a controller-based AP now. Cool. It sends the command to the AP. It falls offline from the dashboard and will reboot and look for a controller, right? So you can swap between them now. So no longer now are you making hardware-based decisions that are based on the management platform that you want to use. You can now say, hey, here's the hardware I'm using, and let me evaluate how I want to manage it.
So, Ryan, are you thinking long term we'll see more of the converged style hardware, not only in the wireless side, but potentially even the switching side?
If I'm reading the tea leaves, I think that's where we're going. I think that kind of makes sense, right? Like maybe on a 9K, you could order it in a dash Meraki mode, right? Like, I still think like we're seeing how customers accept it, right? Like we're like I think we're in on the switching side, we're still very much in a we're going to do what our customers want us to do, right? And if there's a demand for that, then I think it'll happen. So yeah, I think we're certainly readying things for that, but I think the adoption of that will kind of drive how quickly we get there.
It's funny. I
It's a
always
slow process, though, for sure. I mean, you want to make sure you get it right. Well, I'm sorry, Tom, but I'm just thinking, like, I know that the MS390, for example, it was based on Catalyst 9300 hardware, but it had the kind of the heart of the Meraki piece, right? And
Yep.
going from there to the next transition of saying, hey, okay, you got a 9300, let's kind of put it in monitor mode where you're still running Catalyst, but we have a hook in there a little bit to be able to keep an eye on it and alert you when something's going on. So, and I think it should be a slow process, right? We want to make sure that we're doing it right, especially because it's like, you know, these switches. I don't think any of our customers have switches that are in their production network that really just aren't doing anything, right? Like they are workhorses. They're whether it's a Meraki or a Catalyst or any other vendor, right? If you got a switch in your data closet, chances are those lights are blinking. It's doing something. You're right. If it's worth its weight, if it's worth its money, it's working. So you don't want to just, hey, let's just try this and see what happens, right? So, but it's cool just to see that evolution of where we've come and kind of where it looks like it's going. And I would agree with you on the tea leaves thing. Go ahead, Tom. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
no, it's funny. You said almost exactly what I was going to say. I was going to mention the MS390. Like when I first saw that come out, I was thinking, oh, this is like almost kind of the first step into
Yep.
combining the ecosystems in some to some degree. And I was very curious where that would go. And sure enough, we're starting to see the hardware blend over, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah. I think the other part about this is like really starting to evolve how our customers like interact with Cisco products, right? So like if you became a network administrator, in the past 30 years, right? Like your whole methodology of troubleshooting, the way your brain is literally wired to think through things, it's going to be like, okay, let me hop into the switch, CLI, I know my commands and whatnot, right? And some of the resistance that we get from a Meraki perspective is like, I don't have CLI, and I don't have the access to that, so I got to relearn something, right? So by doing monitor mode, right, we really allow people to like literally put like the baby toe in the water, right? You can say, all right, hold on, I know I still have access to my CLI over here if I really need to, but now I can put all my data here in the dashboard and now see if I can log into that and do my troubleshooting and deduce what might be going on in the network, right? From the GUI, as opposed to like I want to, immediately go back into CLI. So I think it's a way for us to bring customers into this cloud management world without having them fully commit to it, right? So yeah, I'm super excited because it's definitely meaning also that from a cloud management perspective, like you know, Meraki's the answer, right? Like that's how we're going to do cloud management at Cisco. And so yeah, it's all exciting times all around.
Awesome. Well, if history with Meraki development and it's taught us anything, as we've just demonstrated just in this one episode of two different lines between the cameras and the introduction of the Bluetooth radios and the access points from a very early start. If any of that has shown us anything, it's that there's always planning for the future, and it's always moving ahead forward. So that is cool. We have covered everything from hot dogs and giraffes to Bluetooth and everything in between, which is quite a bit. Um, Tom, I don't know if you had anything further you wanted to ask before we wrap up with Ryan here. Ryan, was there any final thoughts from your standpoint?
No, I think yeah, we definitely covered a lot. what I will say is, yeah, just remember Meraki has one of the best, free trial motions out there, right? So
Yep.
anything you want to play around with, definitely just talk to your Meraki rep. They'll get you trials going. And if you're interested in any of the Catalyst stuff, all of the information of how to do it is all posted on our documentation site. So if you go to documentation.meraki.com, just search for Catalyst, you'll find it. It'll probably be the top thing that pops up. And that's the Catalyst monitoring stuff is released today. You can go do that. It's not beta. It doesn't require any crazy code or anything like that. Like it's using the latest gold image on the Cisco side. So,
Yep.
so yeah, it is. That's ready for prime time.
Awesome. Yeah, as we've always said before, right? Talk with your Cisco account team if you want to see this stuff in action. Hook you up with some trials, demos, whatever. If you're not living in it every day like we are, this is things kind of fall through the cracks, and that's why we have this show to kind of bring this information and bubble it up for you to check out. So, Ryan, thank you again so much for being on the show. Great to have you back, and thank you for listening to Conf T with your SE. Be safe out there. And don't forget to save that config.